Hey folks, Dr. Lava here. Well, last time we talked about all the best cut content from the final build of Metroid Prime, and this time we're going to talk about the Metroid Prime game that Retro Studios spent considerable time and resources to conceptualize and eventually pitch to Nintendo, but unfortunately was ultimately rejected by the Big N. If Metroid Prime was the Ocarina of Time of the series, this game was going to be its Majora's Mask. A quick turnaround sequel that expanded on its predecessor's mechanics with some reused assets and a darker tone. The dark horse of the Prime series, perhaps. So let's dive right into the Metroid Prime game that Retro Studios almost developed way back in 2001. So let's look directly at the 21-page internal Retro Studios document proposed to Nintendo, which begins with the game's plot, which I'll now summarize. This adventure would take place immediately after Samus takes off from the surface of Talon 4. Upon exiting the planet's surface, Samus decides to take a long rest in her cryo chamber as her ship autopilots home. However, something goes wrong and Samus's ship computer hones in on a distress signal. The distress signal is coming from a gargantuan alien ship drifting out in space. As Samus's ship approaches the alien craft, a tractor beam activates, and the ship is pulled into one of the gigantic docking bays. Upon awakening, the ship appears to be abandoned, and it's up to Samus to unravel this mystery. The mystery being that the ship is actually a war vessel on its way to a peaceful planet to enslave its inhabitants, strip it of its resources, and ultimately destroy the planet, and then on to the next one, as it's been doing for the past millennium. Most of the ship's alien army is in a state of cryosleep until it reaches its destination, so Samus's primary enemies will be security drones, sentry guards, and assassin droids that have no need for sleep. But the real enemy here is the ship's AI, who's gone mad and is playing a deadly game with Samus, taunting her and tricking her at every opportunity. What's more, the ship's AI lured Samus as well as other bounty hunters onto the ship as a trap, in order to learn from them and assimilate their skills so that it can refine its own genocidal army. Now, let's skip a little deeper into this 21-page document and take a look at the environment. The entire game would take place inside this mega ship, which is more like a floating city really, as you can see from this concept art. According to the document, the size of the ship would be approximately as large as Metroid Prime's ruins and mines combined, or about half its total size. Since it wasn't going to be as large as the previous game, it was going to be more dense by packing more into that reduced space, and devote more real estate to the 2.5D morph ball areas. The surface of the ship out in space would also be explorable, allowing Samus to experience low gravity while also relying heavily on the spider ball in some areas. This is certainly less spacious and ambitious than the size of Prime 1. But this compromise, as well as recycling some assets, would have allowed Retro to develop the game in just a single year, much like Majora's Mask came out 1 year after Ocarina of Time with some of the same compromises. It's impossible to say if this is the reason the game was ultimately rejected by Nintendo, but whatever the reason, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was eventually greenlit, but ended up taking twice as long to develop, releasing almost 2 years to the day after Metroid Prime 1. Now let's talk about the gameplay. It was Retro's opinion that the 2.5D morph ball segments in Prime 1 were some of the most fun in the game, so they wanted to include more of these areas, introduce new morph ball concepts, and in the words of the document, crank the game's morph ball areas up to 11. The ship at some point was going to be sucked into an alternate dimension, which would have allowed for some areas of the ship to have reverse gravity, so you'd be standing on the ceiling, and time itself would run backwards in other areas, so that creatures and machines would move in reverse, water would flow upwards into the faucets, and these disruptions would be the basis for some of the game's puzzles. The ship's malevolent AI would play tricks on you and throw obstacles in your way. Lock doors, shut off the power, activate security systems, that kind of thing. To make things even weirder and just downright creepy, The document says the AI would have split personality disorder, and at certain intervals throughout the game appear to Samus in human form as a hologram, sometimes speaking with a tone and inflection that mirrors Damien from The Omen, and at other times, more like Hannibal Lecter.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
That's some weird shit, and I can't help but think that's the real reason the game was ultimately rejected by Nintendo. The game Retro wanted to bring us was certainly smaller, but at the same time more dense. It was going to reuse a lot of the assets from Prime 1, but also expand on that game's mechanics. The game was going to focus more on rooms and puzzles that had more than one solution, to increase the game's replayability so that a second playthrough could be a very different experience from the first, something Prime 1 was sorely lacking in my opinion. The game was even going to include co-op multiplayer, so your friends could play as the other bounty hunters aboard the ship and you could progress through the game as a team. And clearly, it was going to be a much darker and creepier game than its predecessor. In short, smaller, denser, darker, sooner. The parallels here to Majora's Mask are hard to ignore, and as a huge Majora's Mask fan, I'm sorry the game was never released, especially since Prime 2 Echoes was a bit of a disappointment in my eyes after the masterpiece that was Prime 1. But all in all, the whole Prime trilogy was a smashing critical success, and I can only hope, despite it being out of Retro's hands this time, that success will continue with the eventual release of Metroid Prime 4. Okay, this was a 21-page document, so I did my best to summarize it down to a digestible length. I want to give a big thanks to NeoGAF member Mama Robotnik. His research way back in 2012 I drew on a lot for this video, and last week's video as well. So I'll link to him and the full source material down in the description if you want to read more about all this yourself. If you like this video, subscribe and tune back in next time. Thanks for watching. Classic Metroid boss Kraid was originally slated to be in the final build of Metroid Prime, according to former Retro Studios artist Gene Kohler. The level that he was to be included in was well underway to being designed. There just wasn't enough development time remaining to fully implement all aspects. In Aliens, the second movie in the franchise, Ripley travels to the alien homeworld LV-426, and before the film's end, takes it upon herself to eradicate the alien race once and for all, or so she thinks. In Metroid 2 Samus Returns, Samus travels to the Metroid homeworld SR-388 to exterminate the Metroid species. Samus possesses a Metroid detector in the 3DS remake that functions much like the motion tracker on Aliens. And at the end of both Metroid 2 and Aliens, the final climactic battle takes place between our heroine and the alien queen, who bear some resemblance.